Afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. So, it's quite interesting news today. There was some very interesting news that Labour, the Cabinet Office specifically, Pat McFadden, hence his picture on the thumbnail, has announced that civil service internships, they're not just having a drive onto getting more people from working class backgrounds into the civil service, as McFadden is reported to have said. You can't have you can't have decisions made if you're excluding like lots of sections of society with their particular points of view, which is right. So, but this is more than just, oh yes, John, happy Yorkshire Day. Yes, indeed. I've got my parking cake on Wensleydale here. You see, you don't necessarily need those both together. We have a thing about having Wensleydale with cake. It's not really for parking cake, it's for fruit cake, but never mind. But yeah, it's not just a drive to get more in to the civil service. They're actually just saying, yeah, we're only accepting people from working class backgrounds now. And I'm going to go through why that might be in a minute, because if I'd have just thought it would be good if they'd have said, look, we're going to have quotas. We're going to have quotas to make sure the civil service interns are a much higher proportion of people from working class backgrounds to bring it in line. And I suppose there's a couple of problems here. Now, John's just sort of said there, I'd ban unpaid internships in all public bodies, clearly favours the wealthy. I think they already have been. I think that is already the case. So internships do now pay, but I'll come on to that in a moment. But it did used to be the case that internships were effectively a form of slave labour that ironically benefited the rich. Now, the idea was this. So an internship, of course, it's like you're not really getting a job. It's supposed to be like work experience, even though you do work for it. But you're learning a trade. It's like an apprenticeship in many ways, but for traditionally more lucrative upper middle class careers. And that's basically what it is, isn't it? That's what an internship is. It's what the upper middle class call apprenticeships. But anyway, so yes, they were at one time completely unpaid, which meant if you're from a working class background, then, well, you can't do that because you still need to be able to, you've got to be able to get rent, you pay your bills, clothes, transport, things like that. Even if you live a very austere existence, you've still got living costs. A wealthy person, yes, they also need money, but their parents will fund them because they're helping fund them towards what is probably going to be a lucrative and interesting career. Whereas if you're from like a traditional working class background, your parents probably can't afford to do that. So you're frozen out. Now, internships do pay now. Not very much. They're still crap. It's in London where you get an extra allowance. It's like just over £20,000 a year. You're still going to struggle. And I think that's maybe why they're going this far, because you could just look at, you could just say, look, we're just going to have a quota. We're going to get like 60%, 70% of people from working class backgrounds. That way you don't freeze out people from other backgrounds, because that's going to cause in fact, it has. I've already noted in the Daily Telegraph, the Tories are straight on it. I thought they would be. They're straight on it. Of course we want people from working class backgrounds in it, but no, we don't like this. And I think probably the reason why they haven't done that and they've just said, right, that's it. From now on, well, not from whenever it's implemented. I don't know what the phasing is. We're only going to accept people from specified working class backgrounds. And which means they'll have to define it for a start. It's going to be based on what your parents were doing when you were 14. And I gather it's going to be based, although I need to see more details, on just literally a list of occupations. So I don't think it's going to even be based on money, which probably makes sense because your parents might not want to divulge that information. But I think it's just going to be based on what they were physically doing. So it's interesting. But the reason why I think they've gone all in and they're saying that's it, only working class backgrounds now, is first of all, the civil service, particularly in London, Whitehall, is massively skewed towards the upper middle classes. And it's not there's anything wrong with people from those backgrounds. They've also got perspectives. They know things. They're not stupid. But they are missing key perspectives that apply to many millions of people in the country. And you know, I can give you an example I saw in the news a few years ago. I've used this example for a couple of things before, but it really just stuck in my mind. It was from a few years ago. And you know how you always get people in the media who also tend to be from those upper middle class backgrounds. And, you know, the way they will report on people from like poor backgrounds and people on benefits, and they just don't get it. And I saw one report from a journalist who was actually trying to help. They weren't like treating people on benefits as scroungers or anything like that. They were actually trying to help them, but they still demonstrated that they didn't understand what was going on. So they were trying, you know, this was at a time when people said, oh, people only have children for money so they can live a life on benefits. And this journalist was trying to counter it by going, look, don't be stupid, because then once they know the children have grown up, they'll just, you know, give themselves a life of poverty, which was trying to help. It was trying to be helpful. But the problem is that still misunderstood the situation, because if someone is having kids, and there are some people who have kids so that they can get access to some benefits, but I'll come on to what that specifically means in a minute. It's not for an easy life. But they were imagining that they were thinking about this as like a teenager, thinking about the future. Of course they weren't. They're thinking about the here and now. Now, when I was teaching in an FE college in Grimsby many years ago, I had a number of teenage students, and some of the girls were trying to get pregnant, and it wasn't to have an easy life. It was because they were trapped by shit parents. Because what happens is, right, some parents who do just treat their kids as like money bags. So what happens is you're school leaver, right? Maybe you're going to college, but you're effectively a school leaver. What do you do to have an independent life? You think to yourself, well, you get a job. Yeah, so they get a job, right? Then what? Well, you save up so you can get your own place. No, because what these parents do, and I had a lot of students who had parents like this, they take their wages, right, and they give them back 20 quid. Say, right, that's your spending money. The rest of it is for rent. So they keep their own kids trapped. So they take their wages minus whatever they think they need to go out on. And that's it. So in a situation like that, how can you get out of there? How can you get out of an abusive relationship like that? You can't save, because whatever you make, they're just going to take it off you and call it rent. You can't, with your first paycheck, get straight out, because you can't even get rent, because you need a guarantor to even get a place anyway. So what do? Your only choice is to get the council to give you a place, to say, but the council won't give you a place unless you're homeless. And even then they won't give you a place unless you got dependents. So what do? You have kids and claim to be homeless. And a lot of people, some parents shouldn't have kids. A lot of parents shouldn't have kids, but then you could argue we'd have an even bigger problem then with our already shrinking domestic population because of the declining birth rate. This is the issue. What we actually need, what I would suggest is what we actually need is a situation where when you're an adult and you're working, you can get a place. Everyone should be able to get a place. If you're earning and you can pay the rent, why shouldn't you be able to get a place? That's the problem. That is the problem here. You've got people who can afford, they've got a job, and in parts of the country I've come from, right, I know we talk about the cost of accommodation being prohibitive. That's mostly in the south of England. Yes, the cost compared to incomes is much higher as well in the north of England and Scotland and North Wales and places like that as well. But in those sort of traditionally poorer places, North Midlands, north of England, Scotland, North Wales, you can get an ordinary job and you can actually pay your own way. But how to get the accommodation? You can't just turn up and say, I've got a job, can I rent this place? So what we really need is more of that, enough housing built so you can just do that. You can just leave you say, I've got a job now, parents, I'm just going to go and rent this place now. And it should be that easy. If you can afford to do it, it should be that easy. And it's not. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. The point is you need people from different backgrounds throwing their things into the mix, because although you can commission reports and you can learn an awful lot about You don't need to have walked in someone's footsteps to understand their life. You can read reports, you can learn about it, you can ask them questions, you can learn a lot about other people's way of life, right? But you still need some people in who have walked in those shoes to be able to tell you a few things. So I think that's what I think this is about. First of all, as Pat McFadden says, getting more of those viewpoints into the civil service. Because again, what did I say? As soon as Labour came in, I hope they don't get trapped in groupthink, which is what they've done. In 10 Downing Street, you've got a hideous amount of groupthink there because McSweeney has surrounded himself by yes men, by people who think the same way he does. And you've got this terrible amount of groupthink that has now created a situation where Labour are getting loads of things right. I'll be arguing with Graham again at 1 o'clock. He'll be going, oh, they're getting everything wrong. I'll be going, no, they're getting most things right. They're getting almost everything right. This is the latest case of getting something right. They've had a few things wrong that have been massively blown up because they were badly wrong. And it's because of that groupthink. So this gets rid of it. But I think the reason they're going all in is because even for someone from a working class background, £20,000 a year in London, I suppose there's two sides to it. Someone from a working class background is more able to live on it, I guess, because they're used to budgeting anyway, right? But at the same time, if you're good, because these people have got good degrees from university, if you're getting an internship in Whitehall, you've got a good degree. So you're talking about people from a working class background who will definitely have had offers of well-paid jobs. And so they then have to choose to work in the civil service for slave wages, even though it would then lead on to a decent job themselves. So I still think there would be reluctance from working class people to take up these internships. And maybe that's why they've done it. They're just saying, look, we're just gonna go all in here. Because if you tried to just encourage more into it, maybe it wouldn't work. So you just have to go all in. Maybe that's the reason there. Anyway, I'll catch up with things here. We've always got to have a Yes Minister quote with anything to do with Whitehall, don't we? Brad there saying, so Humphrey, you couldn't find a more diverse lot than us. Cut to 9 nodding middle-aged white men at the table. Exactly. I remember that episode. That was when they were just trying to get more women into senior roles in the civil service. I remember as well in that episode, right, one of them was trying to say, oh, you know, we're all right. We've got quite a lot of women. I mean, all of the tea ladies are women. There's quite a lot of women in the typing pool. Missing the point completely. It's like, yeah, but what are the well-paid jobs? How many women in the well-paid jobs? Not very many. Not very many. But, I mean, I for the interest of balance, I might as well tell you what the Tories think of it. Because I went straight to the Daily Telegraph. I thought the Daily Telegraph were bound to have come up with this. And here we go. Title, this isn't the headline, by the way, it's just a subheading. Leftist Social Engineering. So, and this is what they've written. Ahead of the general election, Labour promised to be the most working class cabinet of all time, which is now clearly the case because, although I didn't like the fact that Louise Haigh left the cabinet, it now means that literally no member of the cabinet was privately educated. None of them. Which is the first time ever, by the way. So that's true. They've done that. But the Conservatives accused the government of leftist social engineering with its plans. Mike Wood, the shadow cabinet office minister, told the BBC, "We believe in opportunity based on what you can do, not where you come from." Well, then why not pay interns properly? Huh? We all want to see great opportunity for working class young people. No, you won't. Otherwise, the Tories would not have cut the funding for state schools. When Labour were last in power, state schools were better funded than private schools, right? In terms of like cost per pupil. Not anymore. Not anymore. That was soon dealt with. But this scheme sends the message that unless you fit a particular social profile, you're no longer welcome. And that is the danger point I saw. I can see court cases over this, by the way. That was my first thought when I heard that Labour are basically going to only offer internships from people from lower income families. So that was my thought there. Are they going to run into... I assume they've checked it out from a legal point of view. I assume they've checked it out. I actually don't mind it from a political point of view. From a political point of view, it's quite interesting, because if the Tories try and make a big fuss, first of all, the Tories are not very good at making a fuss about anything at the moment. Honestly, people don't care. You know, I mean, I still do videos on what the Tories are up to now and then, because they, you know, they're still the official opposition. They're relevant. But people just don't really see them as relevant. Whenever I do a video on the Tories, it almost gets no views. People really aren't listening to them at all. But if they did make a fuss about it, I don't mind that at all, because it emphasises the message that Labour are boosting life chances for working class people. But it works both ways as well. So it's social mobility for the working class people who will now get those internships, whereas at the moment it's only like 12% of them getting them. And it also helps everyone else, because because you may think to yourself, well, I'm not going to be, so I don't care. I'm not even going for one of these internships. I'm too old. But if you think about it, if you're from a broadly working class background, I mean, it's very difficult to, I think, define these days. But let's say an ordinary background for now, one that you may or may not consider working class, but an ordinary background, hand to mouth type existence. And who do you want advising the government? Who do you want working on policies, as in the practical application of policies, I should say? Who do you want working on plans that are going to affect your life? Do you want it from someone who understands your background because they're from the same background, or do you want someone who's got no idea how you live? So even for people who aren't going to get these jobs, it's still a benefit. So I don't think Labour would mind at all if the Tories made a big issue of this. Alec, they're saying another reason why I want PR stops this silly narrow interest group thing. It is exactly that. The problem with, there is no perfect system. I mean, I think under any system, you will still get some groups of voters who will be arguably more important to politicians, just because there's some people who are very fixed in their voting habits. So if you can't change someone's mind about how they're going to vote, like me, for example, then it's not really worth you trying to win that vote. So people who will happily flip between, shall we say, pragmatic choices, those who will happily flip between candidates that can realistically win, will always, with any system, have higher priority. However, we have a particular problem in this country in that it's because there's still a lot of people who will flip their vote, but there's only so many who will flip that vote between two specific parties in very specific parts of the country. Because even at the last election, where we had the biggest change of seats changed hands by the hundreds, and yet most seats didn't change hands. More than half of all the seats, and it was seismic. Last year was probably, certainly in modern times, maybe ever, the biggest change of hands, as in for parties, because some candidates just naturally step down anyway. The biggest change of hands at a general election of seats, the biggest change of rosette colour ever, I think, but certainly in modern history, modern British history, of course. And yet, over half of all those seats didn't change hands. So, and usually you'll not get much more than a quarter change in hands. Even when there's a change of government, you don't get many changing. And that's the problem. What it means is then there's a very, very narrow section of the society that has a say in elections. So PR would expand the number of people that matter and expand the range of views that matter. So it'd be good for that. Derek there saying if you've got a good degree, you should be earning 40 to 50,000. That's what my company pays our graduates. That's in North Hampshire, not London. Yeah, that's what I mean. So that is why I think Labour are just going for it here and saying we're only going to accept it from working class backgrounds. I think it's a way of acknowledging that, as you say, like, see, someone from an upper middle class background will, first of all, get a bit of extra money from their parents to get them through it, right? And secondly, you know, they'll have been brought up to think a bit more long term on it. Whereas if you're brought up in a household where you're hand to mouth, it's like, does your money last till the end of the month? That's the thing. Which runs out first, the month or your money? When it's literally like that every single month. So there's a lot of people from working class backgrounds. They've got themselves a good degree. They've already put the work in. It's a big thing to turn down, as you say, 40 or 50 grand for a 20 grand a year internship. So I think that's what this is about. Otherwise, I can see that, because, you don't need everyone to be from a working class background. You need people from different backgrounds. I mean, upper middle class is also a background that represents society. So you do need a few. I think it's just a case of acknowledging that it's been skewed far too much. Because even like if you have what we're going to get a maximum of 4 more years until the next election. So if you have 4 more years of Whitehall interns only coming from working class backgrounds, that's not going to suddenly skew the civil service towards the working class point of view, because way more civil servants will still have been from the old upper middle class background. And also, they're still, even in 4 years' time, the ones that start this year are still going to be quite junior in the civil service, right? So at the upper echelon, you're not going to have any impact for years, are you? Decades. I think you should have what's this? I think you should have a Frey Bentos pie tin on display behind you. Nearly had a keyboard full of coffee when you told me about your college acquaintance just microwaving them for a few minutes. Yeah, well, I'm not into Frey Bentos. If I want a pie, I'll cook my own pie. I'll make it myself. But yeah, no, I remember. Oh yeah, you remember that. Well done. I don't know how he didn't kill him. I mean, he has since died, unfortunately, but I don't know how he didn't kill himself at the time, eating raw pie, thinking that a pie that takes 45 minutes in the oven can be heated in the microwave for a few seconds. See, he wasn't a scientist like me, you see. He was an artist. That's the problem with artists. Charlie Mullins thinks Bojo and 9 Jobs are working class. Yeah, you see. And the thing is, he would have been working class. It's weird, isn't it, how people can completely change their perceptions like that. Because you can forget. You can forget. But anyway, Pygmalion there saying, I think it's only about 200,000 votes that actually count. Yeah, often it is 300,000 votes. That often is what it comes down to. Even in an election like last year, you may think maybe it was a bit different last year. Not really. The margins were just tighter in a lot of... It's just that those votes that counted were spread over more seats, that's all. So the margins were much tighter. I mean, I kept saying, what have I kept saying almost all through the life of this channel? The Conservatives won in 2019 with not many more votes than in 2017, where they still formed a government, but they got a minority out of it. And yet they got a large majority. Why? Mathematically, it's really simple, but this is what happened. Boris Johnson more effectively concentrated those votes into the areas he needed to win. So the Conservatives won a lot of seats by small, modest margins. And Labour did it to an even greater extent last year. They won a lot of seats by really very tight margins. Alec, they're saying 1906 was the last time we had a big seat change. Yeah, it was a big one. That was the last time the Tories really properly shit the bed. So Emily Thornberry, to be fair, was saying it years ago, how after 2019, everyone was really downcast. I was really downcast. And she was saying, just remember 1906. And what happened in 1906? The Conservatives in the previous election had won a massive majority on a populist agenda, which turned out to be a load of lies. And people saw the lies. 1906 had an election. Liberals came in. The Liberals stormed to power for pretty much the last time, wasn't it? Because that was just at the point. Labour were just starting to find their feet at that point. Oh, John making a point here. I did want to make this point as well. Also, when working class people, especially women or ethnic minority backgrounds, do get into high profile jobs or positions, they have to work twice as hard to get there or stay there. So reminds me of the point I also wanted to make. Another thing that will get the right wing frothing over it. So this is really just about getting people from different socio-economic backgrounds into Whitehall. That will inevitably, however, mean that you will end up, just statistically, with more people from, not necessarily more women, but more people who aren't white ending up with these internships. And then you'll have Nigel Farage frothing about DEI, won't you? Oh, it'll be coming, don't you worry, it'll be coming. I mean, this Daily Telegraph article, it's just a factual article. The first half is Labour's position, the second half is the Tories' position. And then it's the end bit where they're just explaining the nuts and bolts of it. So this is just a factual article. It won't. They'll be commissioning an opinion piece as we speak. They'll be getting someone, Isabel Oakeshott, the Arabian immigrant, to write a piece on it, no doubt, or someone. Someone's going about Fray Bentos pies. They're smaller and not as good as they used to be. That is half literally true. Oh, I'll tell you what I do miss, although I can just make better versions myself, arguably. But, sometimes there's just like shit food that's just, from your youth that's quite nice. I'll tell you two that have disappointed me. So, when I was young, I used to be able to get these multi-packs of like small pizzas. You just put them under the grill. Do you remember those? Came in a packet and put them in the freezer. So you get one out, put it under the grill for your lunch. And I used to really like those. And every time I try and buy something that I think is the same thing now, they're always rubbish. And I don't know whether it is just because as I've got older and I cook stuff properly myself, my palate has become more sophisticated, or whether they have actually just got crapper. But I'll tell you something that definitely has got crapper. So another thing I used to like, the Campbell's meatballs, but the shit food, right? Shit food. But the cans of Campbell's meatballs, particularly the one in tomato sauce, I used to love those. But they don't do them anymore. Now they do and they don't, because they got bought out by someone else. May have been Frey Packer. Who was it? Someone else has bought them anyway. But you still have the same sort of things. But they're now made of like chicken or something. But they taste shit. They're absolutely awful. So if ever I want to try and replicate it, which I'm going to do tomorrow, by the way, but you have to get some real meatballs and then just slow cook them in gravy or like tomato sauce. It's the only way to do it. And even then, do you know what? I just liked the canned ones. You can't get them anymore though. They're shit. Derek, they're saying those mini pizzas were always crap. Okay, well maybe I just liked them as a kid then. I have wondered. I didn't know whether they'd changed them or whether it was just. But yeah, the Urban, they're saying the first pizza I ever had in the 80s were those. Well, they would have been the same for me. We didn't have a pizza place in my village. In my village, it's a big village, by the way. I'm not talking, don't think about traditional village. Large village, large population. It's even larger now because the pit is now a housing estate. But takeaways, you had a fish and chip shop. That was it. Actually, no, you had a couple of fish and chip shops. Then towards the end of the 80s, there was an Indian, I think. There was no pizza place while I lived there at all. Even the Chinese was in the next village. Go to the next village to get the Chinese. So, yeah, the pizzas we had were freezer pizzas. But Derek assuring me that those pizzas were always crap. Well, there it goes. I must have just become a bit more sophisticated. Oh, Ben, they're saying the Heinz tinned ravioli got worse. Now, that's a funny one. I don't like pasta. Hate it. But weirdly, some canned pasta I can eat. Although I haven't for many years because I'm not mad for it. But it's the only type of pasta I can actually eat. Is like not all. Branston's rubbish. But there we go. Anyway, welcome to Cooking with Phil, the Friday Fix. Well, this is the opposite. Sorry, this is the opposite. This is talking about food you don't cook. Because, a lot of the time, if you cook your own... I mean, I cook my own food, right? If you cook your own food, it is, of course, better. Of course, it's better. But there are just some things. Like processed food that actually I used to like. And still would if they could do it, but they just don't do it anymore. But anyway, right, last one, we'll get back on topic before we finish. Tom, they're saying, I'm a civil servant, currently have 2 summer interns, They get at least minimum wage, and one of them is part of a special autism program. Well, I'm just looking at the rates, the Whitehall rates, and it is just over £20,000. Now, you could still argue, I mean, it depends because it's not necessarily full time, is it? I guess. But it's still not good. You know, for someone who's a top graduate, it's less than you'd be getting if you got a job straight away. So the point I was making was someone from a working class background, you know, imagine them saying to their parents, oh, I've got this job. I'll be living like a bit of a pauper for a bit because I've got to live in London on 20 grand a year, right? Or I've been offered this like job in like wherever the hell, Kent, for 50 grand a year. And your parents will go, oh, 50 grand a year, that's not bad. Oh yeah, I've chosen to go with 20 grand a year. I mean, they'll just look at you as if you were an idiot. I thought you were clever, son. You've been to university. What's that graduation photo about? Did you knock your head on something? You've been kicked in the head by an horse? Who's popping there? 20 grand a year was crap in 2008. Ooh, I don't know about that. I mean, in London, I suppose, maybe. Where I came from, 20 grand a year in 2008, that was fine. Actually, 20 grand a year now you can live on. In like parts of the world I come from. This is the thing, that I constantly, whenever I'm thinking about like rates of pay and thing, I constantly have to try and understand the situation in the southeast of England, which I have no experience of. Because the only places I've lived in, minimum wage I'm not saying it's like, you know, brilliant, spear and skittles all day long. It's still, it's not good. But you can live on it. You can live fine on it. You're not, you know, you're not struggling to pay the bills. If you're full-time minimum wage in, say, around Doncaster or, you know, parts of North Lincolnshire, like Scunthorpe, places where I've lived, Grimsby, you can actually manage. As long as you've got stable accommodation, because it would take you a while, admittedly, to save up for a mortgage. It wouldn't be impossible, by the way, but you'd be better off doing it with a partner who also works. On your own would be a struggle. Not impossible, but it would be a struggle. But you could rent as long as your landlord was stable. Because, you know, that is always an issue, isn't it? But anyway, there it is. We'll leave it there. I've got to go and argue with Graham about Labour now in half an hour. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great rest of Friday. And until next time, I'll see you later.